I think sustainability is impacted dramatically by artificial intelligence, a little bit by generative AI, but much more by traditional AI. And that's why I love the evolution of Gen AI, because now people are asking better questions about how to use AI as a whole. And in the world of sustainability, sensors and knowing more about our environment is more accessible than ever. But now if you put on the layer of a natural language engine in front of it, where I could just ask, like, how much energy are we spending doing this? Or are there other options? One of my best favorite prompts that I use in order to get businesses to talk to machines is I will just ask it, okay, here's what we're thinking. Am I missing anything? Just asking a model, am I missing something? And it'll maybe present things that are completely irrelevant, but every so often it might trigger an idea, a human idea, to do something better, faster, more efficient than I would have done otherwise. So supply chain sustainability is a huge concern for most of us, right? Like this is when our supplies, like our toilet paper doesn't show up, or we go to the store and it doesn't have the coffee that I like to drink. It is very interesting today that most organizations that have very complex supply chains don't have what I call a unified way of seeing the data across their business, even just unified forecasting. So AI is a really great tool that we're now seeing used by some of the largest manufacturing lines in the world to just create a unified view of how the supply chain is operating. But then if you want to think a little bit bigger, maybe, a little bit more futuristic, we are also now starting to see the use of the metaverse, right? Being able to actually see the supply chain, imagine it, but not just in our mind, actually create a virtual experience of a supply chain. I'm from Florida, so implement things like what happens if a hurricane comes, but we can actually simulate the entire hurricane process, the cone, where it moves, all of the different things that happen with weather systems can now be simulated in very unique detail that wasn't really possible before AI. The tech has actually been evolving for a couple decades now. It's much harder for organizations to get their head around the organizational change that's necessary to adopt these technologies. So how do you get a workforce that's willing to be very vocal and vulnerable about how they want to improve themselves? How do you get a leadership that's willing to think differently and reinvent how it might be even their way of building it? Like 20 years ago, it could be the way they created. They have to go back and say, well, that's not efficient anymore. It takes a certain type of leader to be able to say that, right? To be able to kind of back away from tried and true ways of doing things to now think about things differently in the world of AI. I am happy to say that many of the big tech companies have leaders like this, right? Satya Nadella and, this Arvind at IBM, like all of these really great leaders are thinking differently and very innovatively. But right now, I think it's probably our biggest risk is what happens if you don't have a leader like that? What happens if you have a leader that's thinking more 1980s style? It'll be very hard to innovate in a space that way. One of the biggest opportunities that AI presents is something that I learned from Jeff Bezos, the CEO of Amazon. When I was working there, he said that this technology will become the great equalizer. And I believe what he meant when he said that was that now this technology will be democratized. So big companies and small companies can use it the same way. Now we're seeing companies like in fintech or marketing technology, MarTech, advertising tech. These small companies are able to compete very realistically with very big companies, actually maybe even more so because they have this ability to be agile in a way that these big companies can't. So I think the first thing is to have some hope, even if you are a small company, that this technology is very realistically able to deliver value for you in the exact same way it does for Google or Amazon. And actually, I think more so because you have a company that you can control and you're not trying to shift this huge ship in a direction. You have a much smaller organization that you can help craft or mold to this new way of thinking. I think one of the other things that comes with small businesses is, I'm an entrepreneur at heart, wearing a lot of different hats. And these models really help us to wear a lot of different hats, getting the advice of a fractional CFO or a fractional CMO, being able to really harness a whole executive team. I always say an advisory board. You can build a virtual advisory board using these large language models that can then allow you to do more with less. And I think that's part of the true promise of the technology. So there's probably a couple of organizations or a couple of industries that are more sustainable than others. And in my experience, I guess luckily, they are usually regulated industries like healthcare and finance. And the reason for that is because regulation is already forcing them to think differently and more sustainably. And so they're more likely to build AI solutions that accommodate that. I do find, though, that every organization has the ability to be more sustainable, to think about it. And the way I frame it is often you have a choice when you decide to use generative AI. You could start with building a model from scratch. However, as far as I have so far been able to experience, that's like a $35 to $50 million investment. So not every company is going to do that, I hope. But it's also extremely unsustainable to build a model from scratch with all this data and all this hardware that's necessary. So the next choice is to build on the shoulders of giants, right? Like Microsoft, Amazon. And that's what I am seeing most companies do, is that you'll start with a big model provided by a big company. And that's sustainability in itself, right? Because you're leveraging their hardware. But the reality is to be truly sustainable, you're going to want to pick the right model for the right task and build a bunch of little models to do this work. And the smaller the model, the more sustainable it is because it needs less hardware, less processing power, less consumption. But we're not quite there yet. Right now, everyone, I use this analogy of baby tigers, right? Like we have this concept of, everyone's got these little models, these baby tigers, super cute, adorable. Everyone's excited about them. No one's really thinking about what happens when they grow up. And so I often encourage organizations to think when you start adopting AI, like imagine one day that little baby tiger is going to grow up to be a big tiger. What do you want to make sure it doesn't do? Like you want to make sure it's not going to hurt anyone. You want to make sure it's not toxic. And so really the smaller, right, the tiger, the better. And so we're seeing today that a lot of companies are building smaller models that they can control, they can manage, they can govern, as opposed to leveraging really big models. And that happens to, again, also be a sustainable choice. I think one of the biggest opportunities today I am excited about is around contact centers. So a lot of times contact centers, especially operationally, tend to be a cost for an organization, a very expensive cost. But what we're starting to see now is humans like talking to humans, especially about care, especially about things that are really important to them. So when we go into a contact center solution, we actually want to help them. We're not looking to, create a virtual assistant that the customer talks to because they don't want that. They want to talk to a real human. I'm sure you've been on a scenario where you've tried to talk to a contact center and you're like, you get the automated system and you're like, representative, agent, we're trying to exit out of that system because people like the human contact. But how do we make the humans that are answering those calls more effective? So I think a big opportunity in this space, especially around operationalization, is how do we make their job better? How do we take notes on behalf of the agent so the agent can be more present? How do we summarize emails so that they don't have to spend a lot of time typing up the summary? How do we listen to the customer and do active, proactive searching on behalf of the agent so the agent's not typing in searches and making up some words to say to you while they're trying to find an answer? There's so much AI can do to amplify an agent's work. And I think some of the most successful organizations have started to see that. And the good news is that it has one of the easiest metrics to measure success. And I think that's a critical part of successful AI projects is knowing what you're going after and when you've actually accomplished it.